There we go. So welcome everybody. This is our panel on ungrading and other alternative grading practices. And we've got some expertise and enthusiasm here in the room from our 6 fantastic panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to them in just a second to introduce themselves. But I wanted to say I really appreciate them sharing their wisdom and advice and thoughts about why they've chosen or are thinking about ungrading and how they're going to use it. Because I think that this is something that as we enter, what is this, semester 6 of the pandemic? I can't remember, it might be a million. That we're drawing from each other's wisdoms about ways to make sure that we are being humane with ourselves and with our students, and thinking about what makes a conducive learning environment. So welcome everyone. And so I'm going to start with Andrea. Could you introduce yourself? Oh, and before you do, sorry, it might be helpful for those of you that are participants to turn to the view that is presenter view so that you see just one panelist at a time. So sorry, Andrea.
Hi, my name is Andrea Scott, and I teach academic writing at Pitzer College, and I also direct the Writing Center.
Brent.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brent Armendinger, and I teach creative writing at Pitzer College as part of the English and World Literature Field Group.
Corey. Corey.
Sorry, didn't unmute. I'm Corey Davia. I teach philosophy at CMC.
Thanks, Corey. Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Zernstein. I teach cognitive science and cognitive neuroscience at Pomona in the Linguistics and Cognitive Science Department.
Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gilbert. I teach sculpture at Pitzer College, and then I'm also affiliate faculty in gender and feminist studies. So I sometimes teach seminar courses related to that, or first-year seminars.
And Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon Stranford. I teach immunology, infectious disease, public health related courses at Pomona College, and I'm in the biology department.
Thank you, and for all of you for being here, and our warmest welcomes to you. I'm going to just ask all our panelists to respond to 2 basic questions to get us started. And then maybe I'll have a follow-up or 2. And then we really want to turn it over to you, the participants, to have some time to ask questions about their experiences or their values or pedagogies that might have led to experimenting with something beyond traditional grading practices. So the 2 questions I'm going to ask everybody, and we'll do that same order again. Why did you try, or why do you want to try something like ungrading? And where in your course did you employ ungrading, or are you thinking about employing ungrading? Just to give us a sense of how it might appear in a class. So back to Andrea.
Great. So you want me to tackle both questions at the same time?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I actually started experimenting with alternative approaches to grading before the pandemic. And Asao Inui is a scholar of writing who's written a lot about contract grading. I actually gave birth to a child and was coming back when my kid was 2.5 months old. And so I wanted to mix things up and kind of cultivate joy in the classroom. This is the theme of the last panel, to try to do something fun, but also just kind of recognizing my capacity, and the grading had always been something that I really hated. And so I knew that there was a literature for why one might think about doing it differently. And so I experimented that semester. And my biggest question was, would students be motivated to do the work if they weren't graded, right? And that was their question and my question in subsequent conversations. And I found that it worked really well. So my approach was really a contract grading model, where basically it said, if you do all of the work required of the class and you do it within the schedule of the class, you'll get a B grade. And if you want to get an A, you have to do some more. So for me, the thinking across various semesters has been what kind of meaningful more might that look like? And so for me, it was really about trying to cultivate help-seeking behaviors. There's a lot of research around that. And also in the pandemic, getting students to talk to other people to learn how to navigate the institution. So they had to take advantage of an academic or career resource on campus, visit faculty office hours, go to the fellowship office, go to career services, visit the academic coach, go to the writing center. They could choose, but they had to do that once during the first 6 weeks of the semester, and they had to do that once during the end. Then they also had to write some extra reflections on their learning, and then they had to write an end of term reflection on their learning. And so the goal was that all of these things I told them were not meant as busy work, but were going to be things that would help them excel as learners and really would be above and beyond, and would be the kinds of practices that we know make students successful. But they would need to do those few things in order to get an A. And I actually found that students' work the quality didn't decrease. They were really engaged. And I also tried to design the assignments so that they would be learning from each other, peer review, all kinds of community building things. I was really thinking about building resilience, doing reflective exercises at the beginning of classes to get them to also identify their own goals for assignments, and build resilience and confidence and throughout the course of the semester. So happy to chat more at the end if folks have questions.
Thank you very much. Brent.
Okay, I'm going to try to be concise, but Jessica, please feel free to make a sign if I go on too long. Why did I try ungrading? I teach creative writing, and it feels important to emphasize the importance of taking creative risks. Writers actually need to fail and need to be able to reflect on that in order to grow. Students come into the classroom with different skills. Some have had access to creative writing classes in high school, some have not. I don't want to unfairly reward students who have already had previous access, often, to be honest, because of class privilege. The qualities of good writing are culturally constructed and, like art, in constant evolution. The maxim show don't tell, for example, has both cultural and political implications. And as an instructor, I feel like I have to recognize that there are very few neutral things for me to judge. I wish that I didn't have to assign a letter grade at all, but if I do, I want it to be based on how well the students challenge themselves and grow over the course of the semester, not so much on how well they measure up to other students. And I'm sorry, I'm reading notes. I hope that's okay. So how have I incorporated this? I've experimented with alternative approaches to grading for the last 3 semesters. And the pandemic really kind of opened up a kind of possibility for this. It's something I've been thinking about for a really long time. I've been very unsatisfied with grading. So I've experimented with both ungrading and contract grading that Andrea was talking about, and am very grateful to have Andrea as a colleague and as a person I can kind of talk to about some of this stuff. But for ungrading, I've done it for major writing assignments and for class participation. The other assignments are all points-based, and students get full credit as long as those things are complete and turned in on time. The first time I did ungrading, students had to write substantial reflections on their major assignments and then suggest a grade that reflected their learning growth and effort. This mostly turned out really well, but I did notice that there were some things students weren't thinking about, and some of them, particularly first years, were still clearly motivated by grade anxiety and responding to how they have been conditioned to think of grades. So the second time that I experimented with ungrading, which was actually last semester, I adapted a process that my colleague Barbara Junisby talked about, actually in a little panel that we did at Pitzer on ungrading. And so what I had students do is to turn in something called a personal criteria paper first, in which they defined for themselves their goals for the assignment, and then what they thought for themselves would constitute A-level work. And then after they turned in the assignment, they did like the normal substantive reflection, but then I had them do the extra step of saying, okay, here's what you said you wanted to do. Here's what you did. You know, can you reflect on that? as you're in the process of suggesting the grade that you think you earned. And I think that turned out to be a lot more productive. I should say that I reserve the right to change a grade that a student has given themselves. I've mostly only done this when a student has underestimated themselves, but I have also done it a few times when students have given themselves a really high grade without fulfilling the expectations of the assignment. I did experiment with labor contract grading in the spring. And, you know, at first I was really excited about it. I was really attracted to it because it kind of got rid of the whole idea of students having to associate their work with a grade at all. However, I found the record keeping to be kind of cumbersome. And I also had some uneasy feelings about the extra labor to get an A. And Andrea and I have talked about this. There's a lot more that obviously could be said, and I don't mean to go on too long, so I think I'll stop there, but thanks.
Thanks, Brent. Corey.
Yeah, so since I teach philosophy, one of the big goals for most of my classes is to help students reflect on their own reasoning processes. So it's a metacognitive goal, you know, to think about things like what assumptions am I relying on, and how do those support the conclusion I'm arguing for, and how might someone object to those. And so because I think about my course goals in those terms, one of the things that stuck out at me about ungrading approaches is that so many of the techniques that, you know, different kinds of ungrading approaches use involve a ton of self-assessment and a ton of intentionally thinking about how to use feedback, whether that's feedback that the students get from each other or from me, or that's the result of a self-assessment they've done. So and I guess one striking thing about that is, like, you could do those things even in a context where you are assigning grades. So my ungrading project is to try to dramatically ramp up the amount of that kind of thing that I'm doing. So that's why for the what have I done so far and what do I hope to do, one way this has shown up in my classes so far has to do with participation or student contributions to class. So early on in the semester, we'll have a conversation about what kinds of philosophical contributions can you make? Like, are you clarifying someone else's claim? Are you giving a reason to believe a claim? Are you giving an argument against a claim? Like, we'll draw all these distinctions. And then I'll ask students to set some goals for themselves about what kinds of contributions they'd like to make over the course of the class, and you know, which they feel confident making, and so on. And then as the course goes on, ask them at various points to reflect on you know, what is your participation like, and how does it match up with what you wanted to try to do. So that's something I've done already. A version of this I'm going to start this semester is to do something similar for written assignments. So the plan is, after each written assignment is due, we'll set aside some class time for students to write me a note about their process, like how did they decide what they wanted to write about, how, you know, what kinds of revision did they do, that sort of thing. And then to apply the grading criteria that we'll have talked about and say how they think they did on those criteria. And then to talk about, like, is there anything they intend to do differently next time in light of how this experience went. So my hope is that that is valuable for them in and of itself, but also that it provides a starting point for conversation when I give them feedback, so that if I have some sense of what they're working on and how they were approaching the task, then I can have a more productive conversation with them about like how I think things went. So that's what's new this semester.
Thank you very much, Corey. How about Megan?
So I started teaching at Pomona right before the pandemic. And so the pandemic really affected like how I felt about grading. I already hated grading, as Andrea mentioned before. And I didn't realize until we started moving in that sort of emergency circumstance to pass, no pass, that the reason I didn't like grading was because it was quantitative. I really enjoyed giving feedback. I love giving feedback on papers, but I hated like associating like a metric to that. It felt very unnatural. And I found myself asking questions even when we had like dozens of faculty meetings about grading policies, which was like, what would happen to me or my students if everyone got an A? Oh no, you know, like I was like, I don't actually think that's a problem if I set everyone up for success. And so I'm basically, as a more junior faculty member, trying to put together the infrastructure for ungrading without necessarily asking myself to fully translate all my courses yet. The courses I teach that I think are going to translate most naturally to this earlier are those that have more hands-on technical training. So I teach some laboratory courses. And what I found myself really resonating with when we had the Guilt-Free Book Club was this idea of having a portfolio at the end of the semester from which students could draw upon previous assignments, like a selection, and I'd give some sort of outline of what would be reasonable for them to include. So they would have to have a piece from different kinds of assignments, and that funnel portfolio should reflect things they learned earlier in the semester. So for example, in the cognitive neuroscience with lab course that I teach, that I hope to teach really forever-ish, there's an end goal project. They have to eventually propose and design and run their own program and experiment. And they have to write an accompanying like research proposal to tell me like why they wanted to do that. So like it has to work, it has to test their hypothesis, it has to reflect some of the skills that they learned, and they have to basically reflect on that and prove to me that it's going to be good. To get to that point, there's so many things that they'll have to work on anyway, that I don't mind if they make mistakes. And I try to model in my lab that I am going to be making mistakes every day. They're going to have questions that I won't know the answer to, and that's okay. So even in like one weekly lab assignment, if they're trying to like program something, what I'm asking of them to do is not get it right, but to note the mistakes they made and over a longer period of time correct them. So some students who come in from computer science courses are just like breezing through, and others who are more novice are then still going to have like a path to follow that's hopefully less intimidating. So ways I've tried to employ this is by setting up that sort of structure without necessarily completely divorcing myself from letter grades quite yet. Transitioning into, as others mentioned before, like participation reflections rather than me just like marking off a checkbox of if someone came and if they like raised their hands and I'm like, yes, points for you. Modeling different ways of participating. So it doesn't have to be in person, because I think as we've all experienced, like that's really hard to assess, especially during switching between remote versus non-remote, or someone has to quarantine. So they can tell me how they participated, and I try to provide multiple ways. And I think that like, I'm really excited about it because I think I'll have more joy basically in grading and teaching, or ungrading, I guess. And I hope the students then feel more accommodated, because I think it builds in a lot of cushion and flexibility for unanticipated problems. Like I don't know everyone's circumstances when they come to my class. And I think within reason, ungrading actually has a lot of potential for being more accessible just as a baseline. All that said, I think there's an easy way that it could become really highly work demanding. So as soon as you transition into providing tons of revisions, you're basically like working all the time to give students feedback. So I'm really trying to be conscientious of not burning out, so that I can hopefully give students good feedback rather than less lower quality, more frequent feedback. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Megan. Sarah.
Yeah, a lot of what I'm going to say is just echoing what other people have said, but in terms of my own trajectory, I guess like Brent, who teaches creative writing, I teach a lot of studio art courses where the absurdity of giving letter grades sometimes can just feel really classist. It can feel really subjective. It really doesn't seem to nurture risk taking. So I would say the onset of when I started teaching, but I think when I first started really experimenting with ungrading was actually, I felt kind of forced into it, teaching a senior thesis class, actually, of all courses, where I just felt like students were really unprepared to kind of be self-motivated and self-directed and just like curious and hungry. And it made me really reflect on our curriculum and kind of what got them to this point where, as seniors about to go into the world, they were not really like excited about their own work and self-directed in their own work and able to kind of participate in critiques in a kind of way that they felt like they had ownership over the discussion and were invested in the discussion. And that was kind of a really heartbreaking experience that made me kind of just really reflect on all my intro and intermediate courses and think about like, what can we be doing differently so that by the time students are approaching senior thesis, they are, you know, eager to engage in these conversations and really invested in it. And then another course I would say that has kind of had its own trajectory besides the studio art courses have been teaching first year seminar, where I just felt like students were coming in with such different levels of writing and different strategies for writing, and that the grades were just overwhelmingly anxiety producing and counterproductive. And so I think at that point, so with the senior thesis class, the first thing we did was just kind of like scrap the syllabus as I had made it. And I said, look, this is your class. Like, what do you want this to be? Like, what do you want to come out of here knowing? And that was actually like a really helpful thing, just to start us all having an open conversation about why they weren't feeling that invested or self-motivated or, and so that's a strategy that I kind of use now in all my classes. Like I do have a syllabus at the beginning, but I leave a lot of space to kind of rework it, and especially to rework some of the language. I think that's one of the biggest things that has changed for me in the process of kind of reading other thinkers on ungrading and participating in discussions with Andrea and Brent, who I'm lucky to have as colleagues at Pitzer and to have some of these dialogues with. I think is like really committing to changing my syllabus language from things that are like students are expected to X, or, you know, just to like really excited, inclusive language. Like, you know, we're all going to have the opportunity to do this. And just to really like focus on that joy of learning and curiosity. And I think it's really game changing. And so for my more intro and intermediate classes, I've tried to do things where, like in the first year seminar, for instance, I choose all the fiction reading that we read, but in terms of like the harder, denser theory readings that we do, I bring in a bunch of books on the first day, and there are kind of twice as many books as there are pairs of students, and I have them choose like some what they want to present on, so that they're like already invested in the topic. And then they work in pairs and they present in pairs. And I think things like that have made a huge difference, just in that they're able to kind of connect with a peer. I in addition to, so I don't know, I think my practices sort of fall between contract grading sometimes and ungrading. I give letter grades, except in my first year seminar, it defaults to pass no credit, but most of my students ended up choosing a letter grade. But in my sculpture classes, I still have grades, but there is overwhelmingly in the syllabus language that we construct together during the first week, and we talk about our goals for the class and expectations for the class. I try to make it very, very clear that if it's a process grade essentially rather than a product grade, and if they go through all the revisions and they take critique feedback and they do the revisions and they meet with me, that's actually one thing in terms of more concrete strategies that I would say really has helped me with managing the load of all these revisions that Megan was just talking about. Is for me, writing written feedback is like very anxiety producing because I'm always trying to sandwich, you know, good feedback and negative feedback, and it just like can take forever. And so what I've started doing with my first year seminar students is, at least for the first project, I meet with them individually, because having a half-hour meeting is like so much faster and also better. And I tell them that they should take notes during the meeting, and then we actually go over the notes together at the end of the meeting. And I think that's been like probably in terms of like concrete things to make my life easier, but also that like genuinely build rapport with students and like help them to feel like they have control and they're taking notes and they're listening. I think that's just been really game changing, because I get to know them better. We have a discussion instead of just like, here's feedback, I'm talking at you. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Sharon.
Hi, everybody. I think I'll focus mostly, I'll touch on some things other people have said, but try and focus on the stuff that's different maybe about my experience. So remember that I'm in STEM. So I'm coming from a perspective of a STEM discipline. I'm also a tenured full professor with 20 years of experience and lots of material built for the immunology class I did this in. So I could work from a starting base. Like others, I learned a lot from the pandemic and wanted to incorporate some of what I learned from that. And I applied this in an upper division course where nobody relied on how much somebody had learned, a student had learned from my class. So all of this means I went into this feeling like it was super safe to jump in the deep end with ungrading. I had read a lot, talked to Jessica a lot. I can send you a list of webinars, blogs, books, articles that other people have sent me to, a lot focusing on a growth mindset. So that's one of the big things for me that this focused on. Talking about the difference between ungrading and specifications grading, which some people have brought up in the chat. And like I said, I'm happy to share all of this. And then I did a lot of reading on how difficult it is for us to reflect on written feedback when it comes with an evaluation. So I really wanted to divorce a number or a letter grade or some evaluation of student work, which they instantly internalize as about self, from feedback that I wanted them to hear and actually apply. So that and worries about student mental health were a lot of what sent me into this. And then the other nail in the coffin was overhearing a couple of students sitting around right before the pandemic, sitting around a table talking to each other about a different class, a different STEM class, where they were talking about preparing for an exam and saying, you know, they were commiserating about how tough it had been to prepare for this exam and how much work they put into it, and how that it was just, they were just sort of preparing for the exam and they needed some more time. But that the work, the topic was really interesting to them. So as soon as the exam was over, they wanted to actually learn the material. And I felt like for me, this encapsulated a lot of experiences I had had in STEM myself personally, and was really demoralizing as someone who was still engaging in high stakes exams. So I kind of committed really after I overheard that student conversation, no more. I was just going to jump in to ungrading. And so I did this in an immunology class in the fall. Like I said, that I've taught many times before. I toyed with rubrics and specifications, but decided I wanted to make sure that I had emphasis on feedback and not on checking the boxes. So I was a little worried about rubrics, but we can talk maybe more about rubrics in the Q&A. So what I did was, my class has weekly pre-class questions online, and I had been doing this for years. It's called just-in-time teaching. So I used those for the students as a kind of a weekly way for them to do whatever work I had them doing, much on their own time, answer a set of questions, and then I would provide feedback online that was written, and an up-down grade, a 0 if they hadn't mastered it, a 1 if they had. That was it. And they could go back at it as many times as they wanted. I quickly learned I had to modify that a little bit because of timing. But we got into a system together where they would have a second chance or even a third chance if they really wanted it, with some window of time to go back over things. And I would keep providing feedback. And I learned how to be more efficient about that. They really, really appreciated this. And then we had 3 summative self-assessments and learning opportunities. We called nothing an exam in this course. And the students did that individually. They were take-home questions, again, unusual for STEM. They did them individually. They submitted them individually to me, and then came to class. And in class, they had a team of people that they worked on those same questions with. They were open-ended, sort of applied questions. They worked on it together as a team, and then they could resubmit their own personal response again after talking to their team, and talk about what they learned from the team experience and how that had sort of changed their answer. They also answered some metacognitive questions about their own learning and how they were learning and what they learned from the process of working with a group. And then finally at the end, and then we met. Another thing I would emphasize. So building trust and relationships with students is crucial. So after each self-learning opportunity, we met for 30 minutes, the student and I, and had a dialogue about what they learned from this whole process. A little bit of content and a lot of thinking about how they learn and what they got out of various things. And it was incredibly eye-opening. I mean, just like I learned so much from these meetings with students. And they later talked about how important these meetings were. And we would agree together on a grade. So we would talk about what a grade was. And I'd love to dialogue a little bit in the Q&A about that process, which was fraught, but necessary if we were going to give a grade at the end. And I would probably change some things about how I did that. And then they had a final presentation at the end as part of the STEM Equity Symposium that they did in groups. And so that, in a nutshell, was my course, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Sharon. We're going to move to sort of participant Q&A. There is a question that's come up twice in the chat about like, what are the sort of basic terms here? What are the differences? And so I want to turn it over to my colleagues who have done something like contract or labor-based grading to talk about that. Usually when we talk about ungrading, I'll just say it's just sort of an umbrella term for all the ways that we and you've heard a lot of these, all the ways that we separate feedback and learning from this attachment to letter grades or number grades or something like that, which can distract from learning. So that's sort of an umbrella term, but I'll turn it over to colleagues who've done labor-based or contract or anything like that, if they want to add how that might be different or adjacent.
Sure, I can go.
Thank you.
So I think labor-based grading is a kind of contract grading, right? Which is a contract grading is just kind of outlines. Feel free to fill in the details if I'm getting anything wrong, or it's just a way of sort of outlining expectations at the beginning of class. And Sao Inui, his research looks at assessments, and like I really appreciated the nuance with which Brent presented this, the way in which our assumptions about good writing, right, are informed by all kinds of cultural constructs that are racialized and that are class-based, et cetera, et cetera. And he really unpacked that, and he saw that looking at assessment data, that minoritized students were failing, right? They were testing lower. And so what did that mean? And so his whole work is on how do we assess in ways that are anti-racist and are inclusive. But basically the labor-based contract grade, which is his key term, says, you have to do, it's similar in that it's grading based on process and not product. And it's saying if you do all of this work and you do it according to the schedule and the terms and the contract, then you'll get a B. But you need to do these extra things to get an A. And for me in the pandemic, and before, I thought there was a lot of bean counting. I agree with Brent, like the logistics of counting were too much for me. I thought there were too many assignments outside of class. Even when I did a few reflective exercises, students were saying, let's do less of that. Let's move more of it in class. Like it felt like busy work. So for me, the art of it has been about streamlining this process and just saying, here are the fundamental core things of the class. I want you to engage in a few extra kind of help-seeking behaviors and reflect on that in ways that I think are going to help you be successful as a student in college, and help you learn how to navigate the institution, right? So for me, yeah, that's just the difference, right? And still embedded in the contract, the labor-based grading, is this idea that reflective writing, that process is really important, drafting, revision. So it seems like a lot of the sort of core premises are similar. It's just like the labor-based contract grading is something attributed to this one person that has this one model that I kind of streamlined and modified for myself to make work for me and my students.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Folks put some other sort of definitions or ways of thinking about what ungrading is in the chat. And I appreciate those as well. So now we want to open it up to questions from participants, and you are certainly welcome to either unmute yourself and ask your question, and certainly direct it to a person if that helps you, or put that in the chat and we'll pass it on. So we're just gonna give you a little time to ask some questions. Marilyn, I see your hand. Go ahead.
So I guess my big question is that I've always done the sort of process with grading. So it's always write something, you get feedback, and as long as you submit it, you get X number of points. And at the end of the class, if students do the work, they will most likely get an A. And my question for the panel is, I'm kind of stuck with the point system. And if I wanted to kind of get away from that, where we're still doing the process, and I guess the question is tied to, how would students still be motivated to turn in the work and to do that process and do the work that I'm trying to get them to do, if there's no grade assigned. I feel like a lot of students themselves are so tied to the grade. I do a lot of selling of this process in the beginning of the class to the students, and I try to get them to buy into it, and then for them to even understand that, like, you just have to do the work, engage with the material, and give it to me. And then we meet together and we talk. We can talk about, for example, there's a project at the end of the class. We meet and we talk about where you're at in that process of doing this project. So, like, how do you sell it basically to students, and if there's no grade during that process throughout the semester?
It looks like, Brent, you want to respond? Yeah,
well, Marilyn, it sounds to me like you're already doing a version of this. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, like this idea of whether or not to let go of points, but I know, like with contract grading, especially, like what you're doing sounds very similar to contract grading to me. And I guess like this idea about points, so I have kind of a mix of two things between like where there are some things that students propose their own grades for, kind of the larger assignments, and then there are some things that they get points for, basically the stuff that builds towards those larger assignments. And for me, I've decided to stick with that because it feels important to, like, part of what I'm doing as a professor is teaching students how to have a regular writing practice. And Jessica and I talked about this actually at one point during the semester when I was like kind of figuring out what to do with stuff being really late. And I've decided actually that I do think it's important that some things be on time with grace periods, but doing, part of my job is to instill in students an ability to do things every week, actually, like that will make them better writers. And so I don't know if I'm going off a little bit, but I'm just sharing a little bit of my own kind of back and forth with something that's related to what you're saying. But I think you're doing something quite similar already.
Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I mean, I agree. It seems like you're already doing a lot of this, but I guess like, in terms of selling it to students or kind of getting them invested in the process and jumping off of what Brent was saying too, the biggest thing when I teach like first year seminars or a writing class seems to be like getting them to write regularly. And so I experimented this year with something that I thought worked really well, which was like I don't have points or grades throughout the semester unless they kind of ask me. I say, if at any point you really just want to know, like if you were getting a letter, like absolutely we can have that conversation, but it's, I really want to take that away without providing anxiety and just focus on the feedback. And some of that maybe comes, I taught at Reed College before I came to Pitzer, and they always assign grades, but students never see them. That's kind of their whole way that everything works, which has, I think, its own ups and downs, but I was sort of used to that in terms of the feedback process. But in my seminar class this year, we had a class website where students would post reading responses like kind of a day before class, right? And they had to do that every week on time. And I was pretty adamant about that like, I don't care if it's free association. I don't care if it's 3 sentences, because that's all you can do that week, but like, just try to do it. And you're not really like, as long as you do it, you will get full credit for it. And then at the end of the semester, like, and then they had 3 longer writing projects, which they had extensive either meeting with me or written feedback for, but no grades again. But what I had them do at the end was like a writing portfolio. And I feel like that sort of made the revisions process a little bit more tangible for them as like a bigger deal. It was like you're putting all your revisions together in one PDF with like a little kind of self-assessment at the top of each project. And I think, I don't know, in that class, it was pass fail by default, although many, I would say more than half of the students ended up opting for a grade instead. But every single student did it, and they did it really well. And I think just having that as kind of the culminating assignment instead of a final paper or a final exam, it was just like a revisions portfolio, was really, I don't know, it seemed to allow them to really take their revisions more seriously and really buy into the process. I think that was a big thing that worked.
Thank you, Sarah. Andrea.
I have a response to that I think also gets at what one of the questions in the chat, like, what do you do? Like, how do you keep students motivated? Or what if they just aren't able to do the work because things are going on in their lives or the work isn't good, right? So, so Marilyn, your question too about points, like I would see the difference between contract grading and something more traditional would be something, an assignment would get a point. It would get logged as done, right? But it wouldn't get like 21 out of 25 points. So that's for me, that's the shift in thinking. Not the agonizing is this 22 points. And then I start doing like 22.5 out of 25, like that, jumping down that rabbit hole. It's like, no, you did the work, right? And I found myself doing a lot of coaching with students. Also, I used the opening of my class to do some kind of like journaling or some kind of reflective exercise. Or one time I helped them learn how to parse a prompt and like do time management around that, but I said, you get to set goals for yourself, right? So let's think about all the things going on in your life. I do this as a professional, right? Where I said, this report's going to get 2 hours of my life and I'm setting a timer, right? Like you get to decide how valuable an assignment is to you, but we assign assignments within a particular time frame because we think you're going to learn some things from it. And we want you to submit it so that you are prepared to learn the next thing. So I did a lot of coaching with my students, like, how do you make choices about how important something is in your life right now? And what is your goal? What do you want to learn from this? What is above the line for you for this assignment? And I had to do that with some students. I had a student get COVID, right? But really for me, the quality of work, like those cases were a minority. When students had the capacity, they would invest the time in it. A problem that was revealed to me in the labor-based contract grade in the pandemic was that time is a really precious resource, and academic work is privileged in a sense, right? And so this assumption that your work, that by doing all this work and then you need to do extra labor, like some people didn't have that capacity. So I found a streamlined approach worked really well as just some like wisdom coaching around some assignments, right? Because sometimes we're not able to give our all to something, but sometimes we surprise ourselves even when we give 80%. And that's a really useful lesson for particularly those with perfectionistic tendencies. Like they were surprised by how much they could get out of an assignment when they gave it 75 or 80%.
Thank you so much. I am aware of the time, and next sessions are going to start in 15 minutes. There are a bunch of other questions in the chat, and if we didn't get to your question or kind of worked around it today, I'm going to share the contact information with the folks on this panel and invite you to have some more conversations. I think everybody who's on this panel would agree that it's a very different experience doing some form of ungrading, but that it has some incredible rewards and opportunities and possibilities. And I appreciate you sharing both the sort of highs and frustrations of this process with us today. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Last sessions start at 1:15. So hopefully you'll find something for that last box of sessions, and just take good care of yourselves, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. And thanks so much, panelists. You're the best.